There it is. Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I hope everybody had a good
Morning.
happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Yeah, was sad to see it go, but then we had Shabbat, so that was nice. And we're getting ready to, today we're going to be talking about going back to the prayer book and talking about one of the main building blocks for Jewish prayer. So looks like there's still some people coming in, but I think we'll get started anyway. So as I talked about in a session many weeks ago, there are two main building blocks for public Jewish prayer services. If you want to, by the way, just to review again, of course, you can pray anytime you want to God on your own, wherever you are, in the grocery store or at the movie theater. Not too many people go there anymore, but wherever you happen to be while you're walking around the block, you can certainly pray to God, use your own words. That's great. What we're talking about in the class is public Jewish prayer. And that's when we gather together to pray. And there's a variety of reasons for wanting to do that. One of the reasons is that we sort of believe that when you gather as a group, there's a strength in community. There's a certain solidarity, a unity of purpose. We're all together for the same thing. And also praying, say, 3 times a day, which I don't know how many Jews do that, but that's the original idea. We're praying 3 times a day, gives you a regular structure for prayer, much like exercising, going to the gym every day or something like that. You know, which I don't do, but if I did do that, I would be much healthier, right? I'd be in better shape. And you exercise the muscles, your heart, your lungs, you know, you feel better. It's a ritual, but it also helps you to get organized and organize your day and feel better. And communal prayer, if you do it on a regular basis, does those same things. It reminds you of one of the things that communal prayer does, because the rabbis wrote it into the prayer book, right? The prayers that we pray, those prayers talk about our values and what we think is important in life. It reminds us that we live in a created world, that there is a creator, that we have responsibilities to that creator and God's creation. Right? All those things are kind of what's talked about in the structure of the prayers that we do communally. And if you do that on a regular basis, it kind of orients your mind to thinking that throughout the day. So there are two main communal prayer, and of course, once we pray in community, we need to have prayers in a book that everybody knows what page we're on. So we're on the same page, literally, while we're praying together. Otherwise, it's just a cacophony of different people's muttering different things, and we're not really together as a group. We're together as a group when we're focusing on the same words. And so one of the reasons for having a prayer book with fixed prayers is that purpose, that we come together to pray the same thing. We're focusing our minds in similar direction. Even while, as each individual reads those words, we may think different thoughts. It may inspire us to feel differently about them. That's okay. We're human beings. We're different. But we're still coming together and focusing on the same ideas and concepts. And then the rabbis had, or Jews had, over the centuries, sort of Jewish Shakespeare's, writing the words for those prayers, so that it's not just what you and I might write if we sat down and dashed off something. It's beautiful poetry that was carefully thought out and incorporates words and phrases from the Bible and rabbinic literature, and sort of captures different ideas and pieces them together to create kind of a mosaic, a whole picture out of the little pieces of earlier material. So that's kind of an overview of the prayer book. And then, as I said earlier, there are two structures, two main structures of community prayer in the Jewish tradition. One focuses on the passage in Deuteronomy, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might. So that paragraph and two other paragraphs from the Torah were combined together, surrounded by blessings. And that section is called the Shema and Its Blessings. And we recite that section twice every day, in the morning and in the evening. And that was the subject of a different talk. Now we're going to talk about the Amidah. And the Amidah was the second major unit or structure of Jewish prayer. And this Amidah was apparently designed to replace the sacrifices that were brought in the temple. So the way Jews used to worship God most profoundly, again, they didn't have to go to the temple in Jerusalem, but if they wanted to have that close encounter with God, they would make a pilgrimage without cars. They'd walk on foot or on donkey, travel on donkey to the city of Jerusalem. They'd bring some money with them, maybe to stay overnight and have some meals while they're in town, but also some money to buy a sacrifice, an animal. And then they would go up to the Temple Mount with this animal sacrifice, and it would be sacrificed to God. And as that was happening, the Levite orchestra would be playing some music, and the Levite choir would be singing a psalm, and certain prayers would be said. And depending on what kind of sacrifice it was, you felt you had some close encounter with God. And there'd be a constant stream of individuals bringing those individual sacrifices throughout the day. But twice each day, the priest who was officiating in the temple brought two sacrifices, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, that represented the entire Israelite community, right? In other words, just a hello, God, we're here, we remember you, we care about you, and we hope you continue to care about us, right? To sort of build that relationship with God twice daily, on a twice daily basis. So the Amidah, this is the way I like to look at it. The Amidah is designed to replace both the community offering, the public offering that the priest did, and an individual offering that you might have wanted to bring. Now, of course, thankfully today, nobody does sacrifices. Nobody feels the need to slaughter animals to have a relationship with God or to talk with God or to have a close relationship with God. So we haven't done that for 2,000 years. But the ideas behind wanting to have that relationship, wanting to be there in God's presence, either to give thanks or to ask God's forgiveness, or just to, to celebrate something, or to just to have this communion with God, those motivations still exist. And the way you can exercise those motivations is by doing the Amidah. So the Amidah has this dual purpose. It's an individual moment with God, and it's also a community moment with God, replacing the community sacrifice. And the way that's done, the way both ends are accomplished, is that the Amidah is repeated in the morning and in the afternoon. Okay? So the first thing that happens in a traditional service, in our chapel service, which is our most traditional one, or in an Orthodox service, when you get to the Amidah in the prayer book, each individual does their private Amidah silently. So you pray through the entire selection of blessings that we'll look at in a moment, silently on your own as part of your private audience with God. That, in my opinion, is sort of designed to replace the private sacrifice that you might have brought had you been coming to Jerusalem. Then the leader, if you have 10 people gathering together, 10 Jews gathering together to form a community, the leader of the prayer service repeats the Amidah over again out loud. And everybody, after he says each blessing in the Amidah, the community responds, Amen. Sort of to say, no pun intended, I'm in. That is to say, I agree with what you said. I believe what you said. I consent. What you said is right. So as the prayer leader chants each of the blessings out loud and the community responds, Amen, that takes the place of the public offering that was offered in the morning and the afternoon. Now, the reason I say that the Amidah fulfills both of these purposes is, I think, somewhat indicated by the evening service. In the evening, we gather together again to do the Shema, because we're supposed to do the Shema in the evening. And then at some early point in time, it was decided to add an Amidah in the evening, even though there was no public sacrifice brought in the evening. You know, when the sun sets, the temple gates were closed and there were no sacrifices until dawn in the morning the next day. So there was no sacrifice. There were no sacrifices brought in the evening. Yet we started doing an Amidah in the evening to go along with the Shema. And at first it was optional. Like if you feel like it, you do it. And then very shortly after it was introduced, it became mandatory. Now everybody does the Shema and the Amidah in the evening service, whether you're praying alone or praying in a community. If you happen to be praying in a community in the evening service, this is the key, you do not repeat the Amidah. The prayer leader does not repeat the Amidah. And the prayer leader does not repeat the Amidah because there was no public sacrifice in the evening. So it's only your private offering to God in the evening. It's not a public one because there was no sacrifice in the evening. Okay, with that, there is some choreography. So I'm going to stand up, and normally this is a lot easier to do when I'm not doing it on Zoom. I'm going to adjust the camera a little bit, and you're not going to see my feet, unfortunately. But you do see the fan. Sorry about that. Okay, so so there's a sort of some choreography for beginning and ending the Amidah. And you, like I say, you can't see my feet, but I'll describe what I'm doing. You have to imagine you are coming into God's throne room, right? And this is the imagery that we use because when the prayers were first written, and for most of the Middle Ages, there were kings, and kings did have throne rooms. And so the idea was entering God's presence is much like entering the presence of a mortal king, only God is the king of kings. So, and again, it's not that God isn't everywhere. When you go grocery shopping or when we go back to the movie theaters or whatever we do during our day, God is everywhere all the time. It's because our human brains have a hard time getting our heads around the idea that God is everywhere. We're not always thinking about it, that we do some choreography, we do some kinetic activity to sort of bring our minds to focus on the idea we're in God's presence, right? And again, imagining it as God's throne room because that was sort of the metaphor of the times. It might work, you know, for Americans to think about, say you were visiting the White House, right? And you were going into the Situation Room in the White House or the West Wing, whatever, the cabinet room in the White House. I'm not that familiar with the floor plan of the White House, but a big, you know, a big room where you're meeting the President of the United States, something to that effect. And there's a choreography. You don't just walk in and say, "Hey, dude, how you doing?" Mm-hmm. Right? So, so the choreography is you want to take 3 steps forward. And with those 3 steps forward, you're imagining that you are entering into the throne room. But because synagogues have pews, rows of chairs that are close together, you often cannot take 3 steps forward because if you did that, you'd fall over the pew in front of you, right? And make a big splash in the person sitting ahead of you. That would not be a good thing. So we take imaginary steps, baby steps. And before we take those baby steps, to make room for those baby steps, we take 3 kind of little bitty steps backwards, right? That's to give you room to go forward again. You don't need to take those 3 steps backwards if, for instance, you're standing in the aisle, right? Then you have plenty of room to go forward. You don't have to worry about going backwards. Many people do it anyway, just because they're used to doing it. But the idea of the 3 steps backwards is just so that you can have room to take 3 steps forward. And this is what I call the Texas 3-step instead of the Texas 2-step. So you're going to take 3 steps back, and then you're going to take 3 steps forward. And as you do that forward, steps, you're imagining that you're coming into God's presence in God's throne room. And then, as was custom back then, when you come into the king's presence, you bend your knees and you bow, right? So that on the opening blessing of the first blessing of the Amidah, Baruch Atah Adonai, blessed are you, God's name, right? Blessed are you, Eternal One. Okay, so on blessed, you bend your knee. Baruch, bend your knee. Atah, you bow. And on God's name, you stand up. Adonai. So it's Baruch Atah Adonai. And then it's Eloheinu v'Elahei Avotenu. That's the opening words of the blessing. We'll look at it in a moment. At the end of that blessing, we're going to do the same thing. Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham. And then no more bowing until the very end of this Amidah. The way I explain that is, for those of you, and I apologize for people who have not seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but for those of you who like Monty Python now, an old British comedy troupe, I hope they're still known in some circles. They're very funny. Anyway, they did a movie called The Holy Grail, the King Arthur and the Holy Grail, so Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where King Arthur and his men are going on a search for it. And in the process of that, their cartoonist did a cartoon god. And so King Arthur and his knights meet the cartoon god speaking from the clouds. And they're all bending down and groveling on the ground. And we're not worthy, we're not worthy. And the king says, the god says, stop that groveling, I can't stand it anymore. It's too much groveling. Right? So that is the idea with not bowing after the opening blessing until the closing blessing. Okay? God doesn't want us groveling on the ground the whole time, right? So it's appropriate when you enter the king's court to bow. And as we're going to see, you bow on your way out. But while you're in the presence of the king, you're supposed to stand upright. God gave us two legs and with locking knees so that we can stand upright even before our creator. So you bow at the beginning, you bow at the end, nothing in between. So the choreography again is the 3 steps back, 3 steps forward as you enter God's courtroom, Baruch Atah Adonai, and then at the end of that opening blessing, Baruch Atah Adonai. And then at the end of the Amidah, we're gonna say thank you, God, Modim Anachnu Lach, and on Modim Anachnu Lach we give thanks to you. On the word modim, we bow, not bending our knees, just bowing straight. We give thanks to you, right? That's the way you show appropriate gratitude to God. Modim anachnu lach. And then at the end of that modim prayer, again, it's Baruch. You bend your knee on Baruch, Atah Adonai, and then the closing seal of that blessing, right? So bowing at the beginning blessing, bowing at that thank you blessing. And then after the Amidah is over, we say the last line that's used, the last line of the Kaddish prayer, Osei Shalom Bimramav, may the one who makes peace in the heavens above make peace for us here on earth. And as we say Osei Shalom Bimramav, we're going to back out of God's courtroom. Okay, again, the protocol is you don't turn your back on the king. That's not appropriate. That's not dignified. It's disrespectful. Right? You don't just say, okay, God, see ya, and kind of walk out the door. You need to back out of the courtroom, right? So you take 3 steps back, backing away from God's presence, as it were. And as we say, Osei Shalom Bimramav, you're going to bow again. Osei Shalom Bimramav, the first time you bow to the left. Hu Ya'aseh Shalom to the right. And then you bow forward, Alinu V'Al Kol Yisrael, right? So it's left, right, center. Now, I'm sure somebody is going to ask, why do we bow to the left first and the right second? Okay, so if you didn't ask that question, you have to get used to asking these questions because Jews love to ask questions and then they ask that question, all right? So there was a big debate, naturally, about which way you're supposed to bow first. And the assumption was, I'm going to sit down here for the rest of this. The assumption was that most people were right-handed. I happen to be left-handed, so I'm offended, but that's beside the point. Most people were right-handed. And and so you would normally want to bow to the right. But the question that people asked was, whose right do you bow to? Your right or God's right? Like if God's facing you, right? That was the issue. And the conclusion was you bow to God's right. God's more important. And so God's right is your left. And that's why you're bowing to the left side first, and then the right, and then the center, okay, as you take leave of God's presence, right? And now you can go about brushing your teeth and grocery shopping and not have to worry about, thinking about God. God is in your presence all the time, which he is, but it's kind of not in your mind anymore because you took those 3 steps back, right? You made an effort to put yourself into that frame of mind. Now you're kind of slowly receding from that frame of mind, and you can go about your daily work. All right, so that's the choreography of the Amidah. And now I'm going to show you the words. Everybody with me so far? Any questions? Okay. Okay, so let's share screen. And what I'm going to do is show you the Amidah here. Boom. Okay, here it is. So as I said, it replaces public sacrifice. It's like your private audience with God. What would you say to God? The Amidah provides you a structure of thoughts and ideas that you might want to think about while you're praying to God. And again, so the value of the prayer book is it gives us words to pray. Most of us are not wordsmiths. Number 2, it helps us to all be on the same page. Since it's a community prayer, we're saying this as a community, we need to have at least be on the same page, even if we have different thoughts about the words on the page. So the third thing is it gives us some ideas about what we would want to say to God in a private audience. Now, there are places in the Amidah where you can insert your own ideas, including your own ideas and thoughts that are not related to these blessings. And you can also add your own ideas about each of the blessings. And I would say a third thing, which may sound a little heretical, but I take my counsel here from a wise scholar, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a teacher at the seminary. And he said, look, if some words on the page don't mean anything to you at this particular moment, skip those words and go to some words that do strike you and you find meaning, right? So it's quite possible. You can think of it like a shopping list of things to talk about with God. And the list always has carrots, celery, and tomatoes on it, but maybe this week you don't need carrots, right? So just skip the carrots and go to the celery and tomatoes. Okay, so that's kind of that aspect of it. Another important point to make here is this: when the rabbis fixed the order of the prayers originally, only the seal, the final line of the blessing was fixed. The wording of that blessing was fixed. The paragraph that introduces that final line was fluid and was composed by different poets and prayer leaders. And that's why if you go to Morocco or Iraq or Syria or France, you will find sometimes you'll find some different variations of the words. They're still the same seal of the blessing, but the paragraphs may be slightly different from place to place because different communities chose different wording for the blessings around it. In every Amidah, there originally were 18 blessings, so it was originally called the Shemona Esrei, which is Hebrew for 18. But again, in the early centuries, probably the first century, a 19th blessing was added. But since it was already still called the Shemona Esrei, the name Shemona Esrei stuck even when it's now 19 blessings. Go figure, it's a Jewish thing. You just have to deal with it. So on the weekday, there are 18 or really 19 blessings in every Amidah. On the Sabbath and festivals, there are only 7. The same 3 opening blessings in the Amidah are there regardless of whether it's a Shabbat festival or a weekday service. It's always the same 3 blessings and always the same 3 closing blessings. It's the middle blessings that change. So in the middle, during the rest of the week, there are 13 blessings talking about things we would like to have from God, things we pray that God will help us to happen. But on Shabbat and festivals, we're not supposed to be bothered with such mundane things as asking for these kinds of things. So we remove those 13 blessings of petition and replace it with one blessing which says today is a holy day, right? And that's about the holiness of the Shabbat or the festivals. And the wording of that middle blessing depends on whether it's Shabbat or one of the festivals. Okay, but the structure of the Shemona Esrei remains the same with the opening 3 and closing 3 blessings. So now here's an outline of the opening 3 blessings. And what I'm going to do is skip that, and you can go out, look at it after the class is over and see if I missed anything. And then write me if you have any questions. What I'm going to do is look at a sample prayer book where the blessings are actually found so that you can see how they fit in, how they work out in a prayer book. So this is an Amidah from Sim Shalom, our movement's prayer book prior to the one we use today. And but again, the Hebrew words haven't changed. The English translation might have been somewhat different, but it's still, still basically translating the same words. So, okay, so we're going to come into God's presence. We're going to take those 3 steps back, 3 steps forward. And before we actually begin the Amidah, there's a verse from Psalm 51:17 that we often say privately, which the public prayer leader, when he repeats the Amidah, does not repeat this. But in your private prayers, you can begin with this opening statement. Adonai sifatai tiftach, ufi yagid tehilatecha, which means Eternal One, open my lips, sifatai are actually my lips, open my lips that my mouth may declare your glory, or your may praise you. And it's again it's a verse from Psalms. So as we enter God's presence, we ask, that he inspire us to pray the words beautifully, and with intention. And okay, so then it starts. Now for this opening blessing, I'm going to make one more suggestion, and that is that we think about, not to be too cavalier, but Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Okay, so Dorothy is told to go see the great, powerful, awesome Wizard of Oz. And the first time she comes into his throne room, it's this enormous cavernous space. And there's this enormous, huge face at the front with a booming, loud voice, terrifying her. And of course, she didn't come alone. She came with her friends, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Cowardly Lion. Not the most helpful friends, but that's what she had. Oh, and her dog Toto. But anyway, so the Tin Man, the Lion, and the Scarecrow. That gives her some comfort when she comes in the presence of the great, powerful, awesome Wizard of Oz. Okay, we're coming into the presence of the great, awesome, powerful, mighty creator of the entire universe, a slightly different matter. And so we might also feel somewhat intimidated. So when we come into God's presence, the first thing we do is we invite our friends, in this case, our ancestors. And by the way, when you convert to Judaism, they're your ancestors too, right? So don't worry about that. They're your ancestors, 100%. So that's the idea here, at least the way I like to explain it, with this opening blessing, right? So the opening blessing is, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, Eternal One. This is God's name, Yud He Vav He. Eloheinu, our God, Ve'Elohei Avotenu, and God of our ancestors. And then it says, Elohei Abraham, the God of Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, the God of Isaac, Ve'Elohei Yaakov, the God of Jacob. Right? That is actually a quote, as I note here, from Exodus chapter 3, verse 6. And that comes from Moses standing at the burning bush, and God introducing himself to Moses, right? Perhaps for the first time, right? Moses takes a look at this weird thing, this bush that is burning, but doesn't seem to be burned up, right? It continues to burn eternally. That's unusual. And he turns aside to take a look. And the first thing he hears is a voice telling him to take off his shoes because he's standing on holy ground. And then it says, he says, I am the Lord your God, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, in the commentary on that verse in Exodus, the commentaries ask, why did God have to say, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob? Why didn't God just say, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? He repeated God of. That's redundant, right? I don't need the extra God of. Why did God have to say that? And the answer that's generally given is because even though God is the same God, each person experiences God differently, okay? So God had a different relationship with each of the ancestors. And by the same token, God has a unique relationship with each one of us. So at the same time that we are introducing ourselves, not as an isolated, frail human being, but as a human being who approaches God through a tradition that goes thousands of years back into history, back to the beginning with our patriarchs and matriarchs, but also a God who relates to each person differently. And even though I'm mentioning those ancestors, I also recognize that I have my own unique relationship with God as well, right? One other thing you might want to think about is it does come from the scene of the burning bush, where God tells Moses to take his shoes off because he's standing in holy ground. We have just walked into God's courtroom. I'm not suggesting you necessarily need to take your shoes off. Jews don't do that today. But it is a way to acknowledge we're now in a holy space, right? We're in God's holy courtroom. That's what we're supposed to imagine. I can now, I guess, it just occurred to me, we're now developing new technology, those new 3D goggles you can put on and you feel like you're in a different place. Like, and everywhere you turn, you're still in that place. It gives you that sensation that you're somewhere else. That's the idea here, right? You're still standing where you're standing, but you've transported yourself into God's presence, as it were, in your 3D vision. Okay, so that's the idea, and you are coming into God's presence with your friends, your ancestors. Now, our movement added here to be egalitarian, the God of Sarah, the God of Rebecca, the God of Rachel, and the God of Leah. That does not come from a biblical verse. This does. So there was some controversy about whether we should add that because it's not based on a biblical verse. And I would say a majority of conservative congregations now include the matriarchs because we feel it's important to be vocal, to actually vocalize the fact that women, are just as important as men, right? The fact that our ancestors may not have fully, male ancestors may not have fully understood that is their problem. It's not ours. And we want to make sure that we are inclusive, right? And our tradition has matriarchs as well as patriarchs, and we should include them in this opening blessing. So that's usually added. In the main service, it is added. In the chapel service, they do the original form. And then it says here, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'Hanora, which means the great, mighty, awesome, exalted God. Sounds a lot like the Wizard of Oz, except, of course, we had it first. And this is a verse from the book of Deuteronomy, which you can look up, chapter 10, verse 29. It's in the note there. So I'm just showing you how the person who wrote this prayer pieced it together from little snippets of Bible and so on. Right? So you are the great, powerful, awesome God. We're entering God's courtroom. We're acknowledging God's awesomeness. El Elyon, the God on high, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, he does acts of kindness, Vikonei Akol, and he owns everything. He is the creator of everything. V'zocher Chasdei Avot, he remembers the pious deeds of our ancestors. Umevi Goel Livnei V'nehem, and he brings redemption to the children, their children's children. L'ma'an Shemo, for his namesake, ba'ahava, with love. God always acts with love. That is the primary, what I believe, and I would say Maimonides says is the primary motivation for God is love. And that should be our primary motivation, that we love God and love our fellow human beings. So God acts kindly with us because God is a loving God. Melech Ozer Moshiach Magen, God helps and saves and protects. How do they say here? Helps, saves, and shields. And then Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham, the shield of Abraham. And that expression, shield of Abraham, comes from Genesis 15. Okay, so the opening blessing, we are coming into God's courtroom, reminding ourselves that we have a long tradition of a relationship with God that enables us to have this private audience with God today. The second blessing acknowledges God's many powers. Atah Gibor Lilam Adonai, you are an eternal superhero. Gibor would be means a hero, means a strong person, a boundless, someone with boundless strength. Today, with the advent of Marvel comics and the DC comic movies, right, we can say God is a superhero, but unlike the superheroes in DC comics and Marvel comics, they only have one superpower each. God has all the superpowers in one person, the ultimate superpower. And so we're going to enumerate some of those superpowers. And the most powerful thing that God does is he brings life to the dead. He has power of life over death. That's the most powerful thing. And that is hammered home in this blessing. Mechaye Meitim, you give life to the dead. Rav Lahoshia, you are great in salvation. Michalkel Chaim Bechesed, here, let's see. Your loving kindness sustains the living, right? How does life manage on earth? All the intricacies of the fauna and flora, the plant life and animal life on the planet all support each other in such intricate ways, along with the climate and so on. It's such a magnificent system. That's all God's doing. And because of God's loving kindness, all life is sustained on the planet. Your great mercies give life to the dead. Here we're talking again about giving life to the dead. I'll explain why in a moment. But you also support the falling, right? Those who are falling on hard times. Falling can be any kind of falling, emotional falling, physical falling, financial falling. You are always there to support people who are in need. You heal the sick, right? You free those who are captive. And of course, we especially remember the Exodus from Egypt. And you keep faith with those who sleep in the dust. Here again, we're referring to the people who have passed on. Whose power can compare to yours? You are the master of life and death and deliverance. Faithful are you in giving life to the dead. Praise to you who gives life to the dead. Why the crazy, incessant mention of God's power of life over death here? The answer is that this was written by the Pharisees. Originally, the Pharisees became the rabbis. And the Pharisees believed in resurrection of the dead, specifically that at some future time when the Messiah comes, people who lived a good life in generations past would be brought back to life and their souls would be restored to their bodies and they would live in this perfect world, right? This world with peace, universal peace and prosperity, where you wouldn't have to work hard to make a decent living, and there would be no more war or violence or crime. Wouldn't we all like that kind of world? Well, the Pharisees imagined that people would have an opportunity to do that once God establishes God's kingdom on earth, and that God would then bring back good people from prior generations who didn't have the opportunity to experience that. Now, if you believe that, if you personally believe that, that is traditional Jewish belief. And in the Orthodox world, almost all Orthodox Jews believe that that will happen. Outside of the Orthodox world, not too many Jews do believe that will happen. Right? So I'm not a believer in a physical resurrection myself. That's okay. I mean, fine if you do believe in that. That is the traditional Jewish belief. Many modern Jews feel that that is scientifically doesn't make sense, and in some ways philosophically doesn't make sense. I, for instance, believe in a spiritual afterlife. I do believe that God keeps our souls alive after our bodies stop functioning, and our souls are connected to God. But believing in that, I don't understand why I'd want to leave that world where I'm intimately connected to God to come back into a physical world, which, even though it may be nice, won't be as perfect as being in that spiritual realm, in my opinion. So, so that's one of the reasons I don't believe in it. But that's just me. If you believe in it, that's fine. This blessing is supposed to encourage you to believe in a resurrection of the dead. Now, having said that, what do I do with this blessing since I don't believe in resurrection of the dead? And so here's what I do as a classic Jewish thing is I just reinterpret the term. Mechaye Metim meant to the people who wrote it, resurrection of the dead. But it literally means giving life to the dead. And a spiritual afterlife is also giving life to the dead. So when I say Mechaye Metim, I'm thinking spiritual afterlife. If you don't believe in a spiritual afterlife, there are many modern Jews who don't believe in that either. You can understand Mechaye Metim in other ways, right? Our lives, the deeds that we perform during our lifetimes will continue to have an impact on generations to come, for good or bad, hopefully for better, right? Hopefully most of our actions were good. You know, there's just as there's intergenerational family trauma, there's also intergenerational family love, right? So if you pass on love and kindness and compassion to the next generation, that will help the next generation to become better people and so on. So the things that you do in this world do have lasting meaning. And in that way, we give life to the dead when we follow in the footsteps of our ancestors or learn the lessons even from the mistakes of our ancestors. Or scientifically, genetically, our genes are passed on to future generations. There are many ways to understand Mechaye Metim without having to believe in resurrection. And so rather than change the words, I would just say, let's change how we think about them. Having said that, I want to add one more thought, and that is that in the Reform movement, they actually changed the words. So instead of saying Mechaye Metim gives life to the dead, they said Mechaye Hakol gives life to everything, right? Because God is the source of life on the planet. God has given life to everything. And so they did change the words. Our movement, of course, tries not to when we don't have to. So we left it Mechaye Metim, but left you to interpret how you want to understand that. I may not have a lot more time. Let me talk about the third blessing. Okay, so the first blessing was introducing ourselves to God with our ancestors by our side, so to speak, to give us moral encouragement and support. The second one is acknowledging God's amazing powers, including his power of life over death. And now that this is kind of the climax, the third blessing is the climax, acknowledging God's holiness, his total uniqueness in the universe, that he is completely outside of time and space. And we are blessed to have a glimmer of God's power and presence. And this blessing in the long form, that is when it is repeated in a congregation, the prayer leader does this long form Kedusha prayer, the long form holiness prayer. And the long form holiness prayer, as you can see from my markings here, is based on 3 verses from the Bible. One is Isaiah 6:3, one is Ezekiel 3:12, and one is Psalm 146. So the Isaiah and Ezekiel passages come from the scene of the commissioning of these 2 prophets, right? At the beginning of a prophetic career, when God first appears to a prophet, in many of the books, they are being commissioned to be a prophet for God, to be a spokesperson for God. And in the case of Isaiah and Ezekiel, in this commissioning scene, they both imagine that they have been transported into God's throne room, right? So that's the purpose of our Amidah, to feel like we're transported into God's throne room. And that's the experience these prophets had or felt they had. And then they describe it. So you can read the chapters in Isaiah and Ezekiel that I referenced there and see how they describe it. It's pretty dramatic. God is sitting on a throne surrounded by fluttering angels. They describe the angels in some detail. Ezekiel talks about them having 6 wings, 2 that they cover their eyes, 2 they cover the bottom part of their body, and 2 they're fluttering around God's throne room. He sees them having 2 legs that are fused together to be like one foot. They look like 1 foot, but it's really 2 feet fused together. And in Ezekiel's vision, they have this weird head shape, I mean, really weird head shape, where there's one side has an eagle, and one side is an ox, and one side is a lion, and one side is a human head. And it's on all 4 directions. So the angels don't need to turn their head to change direction. They just use the head that's facing the direction they want to go in, right? But it's these 4 different heads. It's like, I don't even know how that looks. An eagle, after all, is a tiny little animal. An ox has an enormous head. I don't know how those 2 heads fit together on a thing, but, and then some people suggest maybe he was hallucinating. I don't know. Anyway, the best explanation of this that I found, the animals are metaphors, right? So the lion is the king of the jungle. The ox signifies great power. The eagle either has eagle eyes, right? Because vision is very powerful, or takes care of its young, or can fly, right? Flying is another power. And of course, the human has the intellect, right? So these angels have these different forces and powers that the different animals represent. In any case, that's his vision. In the case of Isaiah, his vision is that the angels would call to each other. One would call to the other. In Hebrew, Vakara ze el ze. And he would call this one to this one, right? So they're calling to each other. And what do they say? Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. That, this powerful scene obviously was very important in Jewish world in 2,000 years ago, and it carried over into the Christian world as the Christians separated from the Jewish world. And of course, they didn't read the original Hebrew. The prayers were in Latin in the Catholic Church, and so Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh became Sanctus, 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 and it's recited in the Latin Mass. Right? So clearly for similar reasons. The idea is it's to imagine that you're standing in God's courtroom the way the prophet Isaiah was. So this is the climax of the Amidah. We're supposed to imagine that we have been transported into God's presence, into God's throne room. And in order to do that, we recall the 2 dramatic scenes of these 2 prophets, Isaiah and Ezekiel, who had this very experience. I wanted to say one other thing about that. Oh, yes, right. We have evidence from the Talmud that rabbis in the early centuries used to go into some kind of spiritual trance, some mystical spiritual trance. And they believed that they were transported into God's throne room the same way as Isaiah and Ezekiel were. But they also felt that it was dangerous to do this kind of thing. This is called Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah, right? One aspect of Jewish mysticism would be to try and cleave directly to God, like connect yourself as intimately as you can with God to have that experience that Isaiah and Ezekiel did. But it's also dangerous. It's dangerous to come too close to God because the awesomeness of God, the absolute truthiness of God, right? The ultimate experience of God can blow your human brain, right? Blow out the fuses. They tell a story, a dramatic story in one of the tractates of the Talmud about 4 rabbis who took this journey. One of them went insane. One of them killed himself or died somehow immediately. One of them left Judaism, couldn't handle it, just it was too much, and just left the Jewish world altogether. And only one of them came out whole. One of them came out normal. So you have a 25% chance of, you know, right? If the vaccines were that successful, we wouldn't be taking them. So, so the rabbis desperately wanted to have this experience, but they recognized it was also dangerous to have this experience. And they certainly didn't want you and me to mess with it, right? It's like touching the third rail. The third rail, that expression comes from the Underground Railroad, where the third rail is the one that's electrified. And if you touch it, you kill yourself, right? So, you know, it's that third rail. You don't want to touch that third rail. It's too dangerous, especially for you and me, the average person. I mean, they're experts. They might be able to manage, but not for us. So what they did is they gave us a knockoff version of their experience. When they would try to have this experience themselves, they meditated on Isaiah's and Ezekiel's visions. And they're trying to give us a knockoff version, giving us those two sentences from those two prophets to sort of imagine that we're also doing it, but in a safe way. So another way to think about it, another metaphoric way to think about it is turning your computer on in safe mode, right? You can't screw up the software when it's in safe mode. So they're giving you a safe mode, mystical encounter with God, right? And that's what the Kedusha is supposed to be. It's the climax of this Amidah, where you're most intensely, hopefully, feeling connected to God. Okay, everybody with me so far? So then in the prayer, it says, hey, we really want to feel this kind of experience here on the planet Earth. So when will you return and create your kingdom on Earth? When will we be able to feel your presence all the time here on Earth? You know, this messianic time. That kind of got inserted into this long form of the prayer. And it quotes, in that context, this Psalm 146, the last verse of Psalm 146, which says, Yimloch Adonai le'olam, God will reign forever. Elohai Tzion, your God, O Zion. Zion is another word for Jerusalem. Lador vador, from generation to generation. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. So now I'm going to give you my modern take on this prayer. This is your opportunity to have a close encounter with God, to try and feel God's presence, whatever that might feel like to you. And remember, everybody has a different encounter with God. Everybody's unique. We all have our own different experiences. So the idea is to try and come as close as you can to having this encounter with God. And then remember all of God's powers from the one above, healing the sick, freeing the captives, raising those who are fallen down. My modern take on this is that we are God's agents for making that happen. All right, God does that through us. We help to heal the sick, right? By either providing medical care, or if we're doctors, actually healing the sick, helping people to get medical care, or even visiting them. Visiting people is also a way to help them to be inspired and hopeful and recover from illness. So we are God's agents in healing the sick. We are God's agents in freeing the captives, stopping human trafficking, ending slavery, wherever it may be, but even other kinds of captivity, right? Emotional, psychological captivity, raising up those who are feeling depressed, right? God has charged us with the responsibility of doing those things for him. This is my modern take on the prayer. And therefore, when we say we want to feel God's presence here on earth so that we can create this ideal world, that's up to us. We're coming into God's presence to be inspired by God, so that when we leave God's presence, we will be emboldened and strengthened to act as God's agents in making that felt here in the real world. Okay? And so that's kind of the climax of the Amidah. We only have a few minutes left. First of all, before I go any further, are there any questions? Okay, so then let me just take a quick look at the last three blessings. So those are the first three blessings. The middle blessing on Shabbat, as I say, recognizes the Sabbath day as a holy day. The last blessings are supposed to be thank yous, but really only the second one, this 18th blessing, is the one that says thank you. Modim anachnu lach. And that again is where we bow. We give thanks to you, God. I don't know why it says proclaim here. I mean, I do know why. Modim can also mean proclaim, but here I believe it clearly means thank you. So we thank you, God, God of our ancestors. You are the rock of our lives, shield of our salvation. We thank you and praise you morning, noon, and night for your miracles that are daily with us, right? Just being able to breathe and having our bodies function, having food and clothing and shelter. I mean, all the miracles that we take for granted, right? This is an opportunity to thank God for all the wonderful things in our lives. And for our souls that are in your charge with your everlasting mercy, you know, for all these blessings, we'll always thank you and praise you. May every living creature thank you. Praised are you, to whom all praise is due. This is the seal of the blessing, the last line that I talked about. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha ulecha ne'el lahodot. And again, this is where you bow, you bend your knee on Baruch, you bow on Atah, and you stand up on Adonai. Right? That's this blessing. This blessing is not a thank you. The one right before it is just saying, please accept this prayer with the sincerity in which it was offered, the way the sacrifices used to be offered in Jerusalem. And since we're not offering sacrifices anymore, we're doing this prayer instead. We hope you'll accept this prayer as our way to worship you. That's what this prayer says. Okay, so after asking God to accept our prayers, we then say thank you. And the last thing we do is a prayer for peace. And that comes from this priestly blessing over here, which is from the Numbers chapter 6, where the priests would say, may the Lord bless you and watch over you. May the Lord show favor to you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you kindness and grant you peace. So peace, shalom, is the last word in the blessing. And so the rabbi said we should end all our blessing series with a prayer for peace. And so that's why the last prayer is a prayer for peace. So after we thank God for everything else, we ask God to please help us to make peace in the world and for all humanity. And that concludes. And then, of course, we, as I said, we take the 3 steps back as we exit God's courtroom, bowing to the left, bowing to the right, and bowing to the center. And we leave God's courtroom, and that's it. Okay, so I will now leave. Diane is here for you, and I hope you all have a good week, good couple of weeks, nice couple of weeks off. We'll be back on the second Sunday in January. If you do have any questions, we didn't get to answer them, let me know, and we can, it's probably better to talk about them. So let me know that I should call you, and we'll talk about any questions you might have had. Okay? All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Thank you.
Boker Tov.
Boker Tov.
Boker Tov. Boker
I have trouble finding my picture. Okay. There I am. This is Half Moon Bay. Half Moon Bay behind me. Because I'm in my bedroom, I thought you'd rather see Half Moon Bay than my messy bedroom. Let's see. Manishma.
Toda.
Metsuyan. So
Metsuyan.
I'm doing.
Manishma.
Ani tov. Gam ani tov. Kacha kacha. Ani tov. Tov. Right. Kacha kacha. Tov. And then what's the other one that we sometimes say? Baruch Hashem. Another one for kacha kacha is beseder. Beseder.
Beseder.
Okay, beseder. Okay. Let's see. How do we ask somebody who they are? Who are you? Who are you?
Miat. Miat.
Miat. Right. If we're talking to a woman, we'd say Miat. And if we're talking to a man, does anybody remember?
Miata.
Yeah, Miata. And so Miat ani Rina. Miat ani Sarah. Miat ani Tehila, right? Ani means I or I am.
I am.
Oh, somebody sent a chat. Oh, it's from my husband. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Let's see. Oh, you can't see my book with screensaver. I'm sorry. Let's start with doing our Aleph Bet song. Okay. Here we go.
Aleph
Bet, bet.
Aleph Bet Bet.
Gimel Dalet
Hey.
Hey. Vav Zayin Het.
Bav Zayin Het.
Yod Kaf Chaf.
Yud Kaf Kaf.
Lamed Mem Nun.
Lamed Mem Nun.
Samech Ayin Pei Fei.
Samet Lamed Hey Pei.
Adi Kuf Resh.
Sadi Kuvresh.
Shin. Sin. Kaf. Tav.
Shin.
Sin. Tav. Mind wandered. Sorry. Okay. Can anybody else lead this? Can somebody volunteer the song for us? Any of you can.
לא אני.
Loat? Kaval, too bad.
Okay, I'll do it.
Toda. Toda.
Aleph Bet Vet.
Aleph
Bet Bet.
Gimel Dalet Hey.
Gimel
Gimel Dalet Hey.
Vav Zayin Het.
Vav Zayin Het.
Yud Kaf Kaf.
Yud Kaf Kaf.
Lamed Mem Nun.
Lamed Mem Nun.
Samet Ayin Pei Fei.
Samech Ayin
Pei
Pei.
Pei.
Zadi Kuf Resh.
Sadi Kuvresh.
Shin.
Shin.
Sin.
Sin.
Kav.
Sin. Kav.
Wow,
Very
you're an
good.
expert. That was great. All right. A few people sent homework in, and I want to say thank you. You did great. So I was very impressed. And let me, before we go to our new chapter, just go over some of the vocabulary that we've learned so far. So let's see. We just did, okay. So can somebody tell me what does ve'ahavta mean? Like ve'ahavta. Right. You will love. The root of ve'ahavta means love, right? Ahava is love. So ve'ahavta, you will love. Okay. What is a bracha? What is a bracha?
Blessing.
Blessing. What is a shamash?
A helper.
A helper, a shamash, right? And what is, and it's also the middle candle on a Chanukia, right? The candle that you use to light the other candles. Okay. What is a kala?
Right.
Good. What is Havdalah.
What?
Havdalah. What?
Oh, the ceremony for at the end of Shabbat.
Right. It's the ceremony at the end of Shabbat. And it also means, does anybody remember? Separation. Because, for example, we're separating between the holiness of Shabbat and the regular days of the week. When I was a student, the sacred and the profane, right? The holiness and the everyday. Okay. What is, have we had this yet? No, we're just going to have this now. And can somebody tell me about tzedakah? What's tzedakah?
Justice.
Justice. It's justice. And oh, feel better. Okay. So tzedakah is justice, and it's used in a very specific sense in terms of giving money to the because part of justice is nowadays people say economic justice, but that's a very ancient concept for Jews. The idea that society should support the poor, right? So giving money to the needy is just a matter of justice, right? So people who have more give to those who have less. And stories in our tradition, people who never thought of themselves as poor, even if they were very poor, and they would always give money to others who had less than they did. So it's a value that goes very, very deep in Judaism, the idea of sharing what you have with others. So it's definitely something that we should all aspire to. All right, so now let's go to chapter 8 on page 34. Okay, so here we see our new vocabulary word, mitzvah. Mitzvah.
Mitzvah.
Mitzvah. Right now,
Mitzvah.
Ashkenaz, we say mitzvah. So I'm sure you've heard many people say, oh, it's a mitzvah. This is a mitzvah and that's a mitzvah. And we've heard of bar and bat mitzvah. But people say mitzvah because that's kind of an American or Ashkenazic way of pronouncing the word, but it's really mitzvah, mitzvah. And although if you ask most people, even most Jewish people, what is a mitzvah, they'll probably say, oh, it's a good deed. It's a good deed. And on one level, a mitzvah is a good deed. But it's more than that. They're things that we do because we're commanded to do them. And for example, giving tzedakah is not,
Can we play right now?
it's not just a good deed, but it's actually a mitzvah. It's actually a mitzvah.
Can we do the 50-50?
Ooh, somebody needs to mute just temporarily, okay?
Reaching 30 minutes and no, reaching 45 minutes and
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the word mitzvah. First of all, it has a new vowel. See the little dot there under the mem in mitzvah? That little dot under a consonant, one dot under a consonant, sounds like E. Now here, because it's an unusual font, it's a square, but most of the time it'll be a little circle under the consonant and it's pronounced E. So it's mitzvah, right? And who can tell me about the vowel or the tzadi? Can anybody tell me anything about that vowel?
We don't pronounce it.
Right, you don't pronounce it. That's correct. It's silent. And we know it's silent because it's a single shva. And almost always a single shva in the middle of a word is silent, almost always. So that's silent. Tell me if I freeze, although I don't know what I can do about it if I do, because it says here, your internet is unstable. So I'm hoping I won't disappear. Okay. All right. So if we look at the two circles that have the E vowel, you can see that first we just have the dot itself, but sometimes it's written the yud after it. So do you see that? It's an E with a yud. The yud does not really change the pronunciation significantly, so we're not going to worry about it. Just know that sometimes the E comes with a yud. You know, there was a time when in ancient Hebrew, when they didn't use vowels at all, there were no vowels, just consonants. And so the yud would be used to kind of indicate that there might be an E or an A vowel. So it's probably a remnant of ancient Hebrew that you sometimes have the yud after the E. Okay, let's look at our consonants. I'll just read all of them. And if you want to write anything in, feel free. We'll go back and practice them. Bet, tav, tav, shin, mem, lamed, kaf, hey, resh, chaf, vet, dalid, aleph, vav, kuf, sadi. Okay, now I'm going to read 3 and you read the next 3. Bet, tav, tav,
Shin, mem,
Shin, mem, lamed,
kaf, hey, resh,
kaf, vav, vet, dalet.
right, chaf, vet, dalit, aleph, vav, kuf,
Sadi.
good. Okay, now you read the first 3. Go ahead.
Bet, tav, tav,
Shin, mem, lamed,
kaf, hey,
kaf,
resh.
hey, resh,
chaf, vet, dalit,
Aleph, vav, kuf.
sadi. Okay, which 2 letters here sound like a V? Which 2 letters do we see here that sound like a V?
The vet and the vav.
Right, vet and vav. And it's very easy to get their names mixed up, right? Vet, which looks like a bet but doesn't have a dot in it, and vav, which is just like a straight line with a little cap. Okay, which 2 letters sound like K? K. Which 2 letters sound like a K?
kuf, and kaf,
And kuf.
Correct. Kaf and kuf. Kaf and kuf. Okay. What letter looks a lot like a bet? There's actually 2 or 3 letters that look a lot like bet. Which letters look a lot like bet?
Kaf, kuf, and
kaf,
vet.
and chaf,
Right. Kaf and chaf and
Vet.
vet. Right. Kaf, chaf, and vet look like bet. Right? So we have bet, kaf, vet, chaf. Right? It's the difference between having the dot in it and not having a dot in it. So what does bet sound like if I take away the dot?
Vet.
vet,
Vet. Nachon. Good for you. And what does kaf sound like if we take away the dot?
chaf,
Chaf. Right. Chaf. And who remembers what the dot in the middle of a consonant is called? Does anybody remember? Dagesh. Dagesh. Okay. All right, let's take a look at our vowel sounds. Ah, ah, eh, ah. Ah, ah, eh, ah. Okay. All right. I'm going to read number one once by myself, and then you should read it with me the second time. Okay. And you can unmute and you'll just read it very quietly, and that way I'll be able to hear you. B, T, me, he, V, E. I'm going to read it again. If you need to write anything in, write it in. B, T, me, he, V, E. Now try reading it with me. B,
B,
T,
T,
me, he, V, E. Okay, good. All right, I'm going to read line 2 twice, and you should take notes if you need to, and then we'll read it together. D, chi, re, he, li, si. D, chi, re, he, li, si. Okay, can you read it with me this time? D,
D,
he,
E,
re,
E,
he, li, si.
C.
Good. Okay. The next line, line 3. I'll read it twice. V, me, li,
D,
P,
E,
B,
B,
E.
E,
And again, I'll read it again. V, me, li, P, B, E. Now you read it with me. V,
B,
me, li, P,
He,
B,
B, E.
Now, on this line, which syllables do you think it would be easy to confuse? You'd confuse one for another on line 3.
The key and the B.
Right, key and B, for sure. You could mix those two up. And I've had students that would mix up V and Lee. So I'm just mentioning that because it happens sometimes. You can see that the Lamed has a much more exaggerated shape than the V. But for people who are first learning to differentiate the letters, the people do sometimes confuse those two. Okay, line 4. I'm going to read it twice and then you'll read it with me. But I encourage you to try transliterating it if that's helpful while I'm reading. Deal, rim, he, leak. Deal, rim, he, leak. Can you read it with me now? Deal,
Rim, He,
leak.
Lick.
Leak. Metsuyan, that was excellent. Okay, line 5, the same way. Bikra,
Bikra,
bar, seal. Bikra, mirma, dibar, seal. Okay.
Dibar,
Now,
Si.
Mitsuyan, now read it with me.
Bikra,
Mirma, dibar,
Dibar,
seal.
Seal.
Yeah.
Good.
Last one again? Can you say the last one again?
Seal.
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 Okay.
Okay. 35. Let's go. All right. Let's jump down to line 5. We'll do the same thing. I'll read them twice.
Shira.
Shira,
Shira.
Shira, Rima, Keria, Leviva, Katsir, Shira, Tira, Rima, Keria, Va, Katsir. You want to try reading with me? Shira, Tira, Rima,
Ma.
Keria, Leviva, Katsir. Good. Line 6.
Hatsir.
Sadiq,
Sadik.
Beriat, Kadish, Aviv, Kehila, Mikra. I'm going to do that again. Sadiq, Beriat, Kadish, Aviv, Kehila, Mikra. Okay, so now read it with me. Sadiq,
Sadik.
Beriat,
Beriat.
Kadish,
Hadish.
Aviv,
Aviv.
Kehila,
Kehila.
Mikra. And so I wanted you to notice that there's a certain music to Hebrew, depending on a verb or noun form. Words have the same sort of vowel structure. So in line 5, we have Shira, Tira, Rima, Katsi, sorry, we have that and then at the on line 6, do we have any on line 6? Yeah, Mikra. And we have the sort of the opposite. So at the end of line 5, we have Katsir, right? That's E. And then on line 6, we have Sadiq, Kadish, Aviv, sorry, not me. Okay, so E. So when you start kind of internalizing these vowel patterns that show up, it makes reading a lot easier, faster. You'll see, you'll start to internalize that. So, and then the other form that we see on line 5, we have Keria, Leviva, and then on line 6, we have Beriat, Kehila, right? Eia. So that's another very, very common pattern. My name, Tehillah, my Hebrew name, Tehillah, is that pattern. Eia, Eia, Eia. Okay. All right, line 7. I'll read it twice and then you'll read it with me. Seat,
Vitsit.
Berit,
Berit.
Mila,
Mila.
Tikva,
Tikba.
Hatikva.
Hatikba.
Okay, again, Tzitzit,
Tzitzit.
Berit,
Berik.
Mila,
Mila.
Tikva,
Tikba.
Hatikva.
Hatikba.
Okay, and now read it again with me. Tzitzit, Berit, Mila,
Mila.
Tikva,
Tikba.
Hatikva.
Hatikba.
Okay, so can anybody tell me on line 7, what are seat?
The corner garment that Jewish men wear after, I don't know, 13? Maybe under 13?
That's right, it's the 4-cornered garment, and it specifically is used to describe the fringes on the 4-cornered garment. So you would say that somebody is wearing a talit, and the talit has seat on the 4 corners, right? The ritual fringes on the 4-cornered garment are called seat. Does anybody know what a Berit is a berit. Sometimes in English they say brith.
That's the
What is
circumcision, isn't it? The
right?
circumcision ritual.
A brit milah, right, is a circumcision. But brit milah means
Covenant.
blood. I mean, sorry, a brit milah, it's like the foreskin, right? Brit milah is like the foreskin. What is brit itself? It's what we call a covenant. It's an agreement between human beings and God. A brit is like a contract or an agreement between human beings and God, right? So when a child is circumcised, it's like in a sense making a contract between that human being and God. So, and we have other kinds of other times in Jewish tradition that we refer to as a brit. A brit is a contract of sorts between human beings and God. Okay. Milah. There we go. Brit milah. Milah can also mean word. Okay. What is tikva? What is a tikva?
Hope.
Good. Hope. Okay. And Ha Tikva, of course, is the name of the national anthem of Israel, the hope. Okay, line 8. I'll read it and then you'll read it after me. Mitzvah, ha mitzvah, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. Can you read it with me? Mitzvah, ha mitzvah, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah.
Bat mitzvah.
So what is a bar mitzvah?
Son of the commandment.
And a bat mitzvah?
Daughter of
Right.
the commandment.
Now, the words bar and bat do mean son and daughter, but they also are like legal categories. So when a person is in the legal category of people that have to do mitzvot, in other words, you're not in the category of people that have to do mitzvot until you are 13. When you are 13, you are obligated to obey all of the mitzvot. So that puts you in that category. So a bar mitzvah is a man, a very, very, very young man who is in the category of people that have to obey the commandments. And a bat mitzvah is the same, right? A very, very young woman who is now in the category of people that have to obey the commandments. In that sense, all Jewish women over 13 are bat mitzvah, whether they have a ceremony or not. And all men over the 13 or older, all Jewish men 13 and older, whether or not they have a ceremony, are bar mitzvah because they are obligated to obey the commandments. This ceremony is an honor that we offer to 13-year-olds and older, right? Because there are many adults who participate in that ceremony. And it's an honor that we offer people, but they are obligated to the commandments whether or not they go through that ceremony. So, okay. So, and here we see the vocabulary. Oh, I didn't notice the word Kaddish. Oh, on line 6, third word, Kaddish. So Kaddish, a lot of Jews don't say Kaddish. A lot of Jews say Kaddish, which is maybe a European and Ashkenazic way of saying the word Kaddish, but the Hebrew pronunciation in Israel and in most synagogues is Kaddish, and it comes from the word for holiness. Kaddish is holiness. And we have a mourner's Kaddish, which is called Kaddish Yatom, which people recite when they're in mourning. But there are other times when you say Kaddish when it's not related to mourning. And we'll look at that at some point. Okay. Oh my gosh, we're almost done with this chapter. I'm so excited. Okay, here we go. Move it and use it. Stand and read each of the following words aloud. Take a step forward when you read a word correctly. Oh, I don't know. I don't think we can do this justice to this activity over a Zoom over a Zoom screen. I wish I could all have you in the classroom so that I could have you stepping forward and backwards if you read the word correctly. But let me do this. Can everybody take a few minutes to review? Few minutes. Can everybody take seconds to take a look at line 1 and try to figure out how to pronounce the words? Line 1. Okay. Would anybody like to volunteer? Be brave and volunteer to read line 1. I won't make you step backwards or forwards.
Tzitzit. Well, the first one is Tzitzit.
Good.
The next one is Bima.
Good.
La Viva. La Viva.
La Viva. Good.
Matzah.
Matzah. Woo! Rinat, Toda Rabba, and Kol HaKavod. That was very good.
Thank you.
Okay, line 2. Line 2. I'm going to read it once, then I'd like you to write in whatever you can. And I would love to do the thing where I read one word and you read the next word, okay? Le, li, tzedakah, devash, midbar. I'll read it one more time. Le, hadlik, tzedakah, devash, mid. Okay, I'm going to read the first word. You read the second word. Lehadlik.
Tzedakah.
Devash.
Midbar.
Right. Now you read the first word on line 2, please, and I'll do the second. You start.
Lehadlik,
Tzedakah,
devash,
midbar. Okay, let's do the same thing on line 3. I'll read it first. Aviv, matzil, isha, mitzvah. Aviv, matzil, isha, mitzvah. So we have 2 words that are e, and then we have 2 words that are e, a. Okay. I'm going to read the first word. You read the second word. Okay, etc. Aviv,
matzil,
isha,
mitzvah,
mitzvah. Give me a good V on that. Mitzvah. Good. Okay, now you start. Aviv, matzil,
Isha.
mitzvah. Okay. It says draw a line under the food we eat on Passover. Okay. I see on line 1, I see one food that we eat on Passover and another food that we eat on Hanukkah. On line 1, is there a food that we eat on Passover? Matzah. Now, leviva is a pancake. So that's what they call a latke in Hebrew. Leviva is more of a Hanukkah food. Okay, on line 2, I see a food that we eat on Rosh Hashanah. Can anybody find the food that we eat on Rosh Hashanah on line 2?
Devash.
Devash, which is, what is devash?
Honey.
Right, honey. Right, so devash is honey. And I don't see any foods on line 3. Okay, now this is really, really hard. I probably can't do this very well either. Just to try to read these lines really, really quickly. But I'm going to try to do line 1 quickly, and then I'd like you to do it and not to worry about making mistakes. Just tumble out of that line, okay? So I'm going to go first, and I might make mistakes too. Da, da, dee, 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 da, dee, da. Now you try reading it.
Da, da, dee, 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 da, dee, da.
Good. Not bad, really. Right? It was actually very good. Okay, here we go. Line 2. Ra, ri, ri. Oh, I lost track of my re's already. Ra, ri, ra, ra. Go ahead.
Ra,
Ra.
Okay, good. Daka, riv, rav, dit, rav. Oh, I did it wrong. Daka, riv, rav, dit, rad.
Rav, Deet, Rav.
You know, it's really, I could normally read it fast. If it says to read it fast, I get messed up. That sounds pretty good. The one that was hard for me for some reason was rad, although there's no reason why it should be, but it was. Okay, line 4. Dar kara tamid midrash.
Dar rich
Midrash.
midrash.
Good. Okay, and now at the bottom of the page, let's just read across the top line for 1, 2, 3, and 4. Mav, deal, meets, va, dib, ra, hatik, va. Can you read that with me? Mav,
Mad,
deal, meets,
mitzvah,
va, dib,
ra,
hatik, va.
hatik.
Right. Okay, now I'm going to read line 2. Mav, deal, meets, va, dibra, hatik, va. Can you read it? Mav, deal, meets, va, dibra, hatik, va. Is there anybody who'd like to try reading those 4 words? Oh, okay. Bevakasha Cosette.
Oh, me? Oh, okay.
Oh, I thought you were volunteering because your screen lit up.
Okay, that's fine. I can do it. Whew. Okay, we're going to read just the second line, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Ma deal. Matzva. The bar. And this last one always gets me. Okay. Hatadar. Hadava.
Well, you're in the ballpark. You're absolutely in the ballpark, and I want to congratulate you for being so bold. So thank you. Okay, let's do this for those 4 words. Let's just do the vowels. I'll do it and then you'll do it with me. I mean, everybody will do it with me. E, ah, e, ah, e, ah. Me, we're just doing vowels. E,
E,
ah,
E,
e, ah.
E, ah.
Can everybody do that? Thank you for those who did. Let's do it again. E, e, ah,
E,
e,
Ah,
E,
e,
ah.
Now let's try reading them. Mavdil meets va
Di
bra
Bra,
hatikva.
Hativa.
Good. Let's do it again. Mavdil
Navil.
meets va
Mitzvah
bra
Mitra
hatikva.
Hatikba.
Hativa.
Right. So mavdil comes from the word havdalah, right? A separation. What is a mitzvah?
Good deed.
Right, a good deed or a commandment. A dibra, when God gave the 10 commandments, it doesn't call them commandments in the Torah. It's like pronouncements or announcements or pronouncements or declarations or something like that. It's called Eser Hadibrot, the 10 pronouncements. And dibra is like kind of a pronouncement or an announcement or something like that, a declaration. So it was like the 10 declarations. And a dibra is like a declaration. So Eser HaDibrot is what we call the 10 commandments in the Torah itself. It's Eser HaDibrot. Dibra. And what did we say Ha-Tikva means? What does Ha-Tikva mean?
The hope is national anthem.
Right, the hope. Good. Okay. All right, that's fantastic. Now we are not meeting until the 10th, right? So I'm very worried that people won't look at their Hebrew between now and then. And that would really be so sad because then you'll get very rusty because that's how languages are. So I would really be so grateful if you would keep reviewing. And in fact, on your own, if you would try to go through chapter 37 and totally cheat and write everything in your book. So, you can write in all the little vowel sounds and you can write in the sounds of the letters and everything. And that will keep you in good shape for when we meet on the 10th. I mean, that would really be great. And is everybody on Rabbi Morgan's mailing list when he sends out mailings, or you're all getting Lisa Unsel's? You're all getting Lisa.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask Lisa Unsel to send out once again. There was one sheet that was really great because it had the Aleph Bet, the name of every letter, and then it had all the vowels and how those are pronounced. So I'll send it out again in case some people have lost it. And it's, I think for those of you who have tried it, you found it helpful to, I mean, this is how the adult mind works. It's different than when a child learns Hebrew. It's really useful for some people, for most people, to work on doing the transliteration. Just in the beginning for the first, X number of months. So unless you've already internalized the sounds that we've learned so far, I encourage you to look them up. Okay, have a very nice, relaxing break. I really hope everybody does something nice for yourself in the next.
We'll try to make you proud, that Miss Diane.
Thank
I'll try. I'll try.
That makes me happy. Thank you.
I'll try.
Already proud of you.
Go practice.
Everybody.
Okay,
what?
bye everybody.
Have a good break, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.